Today's edition of the 5 Reasons podcast is brought to you by Mas Miami, an event coming up on Saturday night featuring Dan LeBatard and Papi for a night of music, art, and dominoes. It's Mas Miami Volume 2 of Revolution Live and Stache in Fort Lauderdale this Saturday. So I was actually at the first one. It was an incredible event. I was actually part of the team that was kind of helped, put it together and set it all up. It was super fun. It was down at Blackbird Ordinary, and it was a dominoes tournament and the music, and it was fun all night long. And a similar event is happening this Saturday at Revolution Live in Fort Lauderdale. It's music made by Miami's local bands Jacuzzi Boys, Magic City Hippies, Cannibal Kids, and Dama Vicke will perform at Revolution Live. Live art will be performed by Diana Contreras and Sona. Plus at Stache, Papi's Domino Tournament will be returning and happening along with a live performance by local band Tamboka. Part of the proceeds will go to Bullies N Beyond Rescue and the Ron Magill Conservation Endowment. You can get tickets by logging on to LeBatardBrothers.com. Join Dan and Papi this Saturday for Mas Miami Volume 2 at Revolution Live and Stache. And now, on with the podcast.
Welcome into the latest episode of the 5 Reasons podcast. I'm Ethan Skolnick here as always with Chris Whittingham. Actually, I'm not here as always because I was not here for one of them last week. Took my daughter up to Disney to go see the princesses for a few days. So I am back. Disney has taken all of my money. So we made it into the Frozen store. You know how they do that, Chris? Like they put after the ride, like they take you right into the store.
Right. They want you to like buy the picture of you on the ride, but then that's the Pandora's box into everything else there.
Yes. So we have our, another Elsa and Anna blanket was purchased. I managed to get out of there relatively unscathed, but she remembered as we were leaving Epcot that I had promised at the beginning of the day that the Little Mermaid figurine could be had if we made it back to the store in time. So she ran ahead of me to make sure that she got there to get the Little Mermaid figurine, which is now in her room. So, I basically lost all my money. But anyway, I'm back.
Disney World is a money pit for parents.
Yeah, it is. It's unless you get that ESPN discount, which we don't have. But by the way, quickly before we get to this other thing, ESPN Worldwide of Sports has really gone downhill.
Has it really?
Actually. Yeah, well, I remember it from like 8 to 10 years ago. Like there were things for kids to do. There was a restaurant. Like now, we went there and they told us it was still like that. We went there and it's just basically for teams around the state and the country, like high school teams, to have competitions, which is a very nice facility, but there's absolutely nothing. They charge you $19, for adults, and you walk in and there's nothing to do. So that was a little bit disappointing, but everything else was good. I've been keeping track of everything that's been going on in sports. And actually, we did start our patron feed here, Chris, about a week or two ago. It's $5, and you get a ton of additional content from all of the podcasts in our network, including ours. And I did a couple of commentaries on there, and I actually thought we could start today by expanding on those. So we're going to cover 3 different teams here in South Florida and kind of a check-in of where they stand as we end July. And we're going to start with the Heat, as we typically do, go to the Dolphins, and then close with the Marlins. And so I wanted to start here, Chris. Here were my 2 takes on the patron feed. One was related to Dwyane Wade, and it was the idea that Dwyane has at least 5 reasons not to remain with the Heat for next season. And the reasons that I went through there, I started with, the idea of he accomplished pretty much everything that he could have accomplished last year. Second, that the Heat had not really done anything this offseason to make it easier for him to come back because they have not cleared out any of the players at the 2-guard spot. And they currently have 5 guys whose natural position is the shooting guard position. And then the third thing was the Lakers are a viable option if he wants to go play for LeBron and they just clear out a couple of roster spots. And he could go play with Udonis out there. And I think, Udonis still hasn't signed. We don't talk about that as much, but obviously Udonis wants to get into business, and Magic Johnson is a great person to tap into. And LeBron has shown a lot of appreciation for Udonis recently on social media. The fourth reason was that he has a viable offer in China. I mean, it's not a huge offer like it got touted as, but it's a viable financial offer. He loves being over there. And he just signed a lifetime contract with Li Ning, which obviously, if you're Li Ning, you want your guy being the number one star in the entire country. And I think that Dwyane can still play at a high enough level for that to be possible. And the fifth thing is he could just retire if he just decides that none of those options are really worth it. So before we get to my second take on the Heat, which had to do with Riley, what's your feeling about what Dwyane will do now?
I'm totally confused because it's been a month now, and I don't know what that means necessarily. I think a lot of us, we break down this stuff in our group chat all day, and I think it's kind of led people to believe that he's seeking some sort of leverage elsewhere. But, I mean, if you're entering free agency with the Heat, you kind of knew what the deal was. Like, unless they're getting rid of big contracts, they weren't going to have salary cap space to sign him to anything bigger than a taxpayer mid-level, and the Heat can still offer that very same taxpayer mid-level. So I don't know what Dwyane Wade was sort of looking for by way of leverage, but I mean, maybe he doesn't view it to be worth it to come back to play for $5 million and have his career, and maybe do sort of one retirement tour season. Maybe there are other things that appeal to him more, but I think we pretty clearly learned that his stops in other places, be it Chicago, be it Cleveland, were not great for either him or the team that were there. Like, I was listening to Nick Friedel. He was on Zach Lowe's podcast, and the way in which he was talking about Dwyane Wade's tenure with the Heat was, like, catastrophic, that almost everyone in the locker room hated him, that he wasn't at all a fit for what they wanted to do. And you just sort of wonder if there are other places in the NBA. And then you mentioned China and retirement. I actually have been thinking a lot about China, and I was talking about it with Channing Crowder on the radio last week, and he was sort of making, I think, a very sort of American exceptionalist argument that if you have anything left to give to the NBA, you don't give yourself to China because here is the best basketball. If you want to play the best basketball, you play it here. Why would you play anywhere else? And I'm kind of thinking about it in the terms in which major European soccer players come to the United States, right? So Major League Soccer is not one of the best leagues in the world, but Steven Gerrard came, and Andrea Pirlo came, and David Beckham came, and now Wayne Rooney and Zlatan Ibrahimovic are here. And it's like Zlatan Ibrahimovic is scoring a ton of goals. He actually scored a hat-trick last night for LA Galaxy. He could go and play for a mid-level team in Italy or in Germany or wherever and be a productive player and start a lot and score plenty of goals, but he viewed it as a bigger commercial opportunity for himself to play in Los Angeles and to play for one of the flagship franchises of Major League Soccer, and so he made that decision to pursue other things other than sporting things. And I feel like Dwyane Wade can do the same thing by going to China. So I would actually, I would find it totally reasonable if he decided to make that decision. It's really the lifestyle factors for me that are the only reasons why he wouldn't. So I'm entirely uncertain what he's going to do, but I really don't see bad options here for Dwyane. If he wants to do a retirement tour, if he just flatly wants to retire, like I don't think those are bad options for him either.
Yeah, I don't think he's retiring. To me, that's the least likely of the options because I mean, all of the working out, particularly with LeBron, the shirtless working out, like I that doesn't seem to me like a guy who's going to retire. Now I know Ray Allen did a lot of that and ultimately didn't come back, and there are some similarities here actually to Ray's ending. Like Ray's thing just dragged out forever, and then it was over, and like it was Ray retired. Like what just happened? And I know that the Heat tried to get Ray back a couple of times, and Ray was not happy with the organization with Spoelstra. And then some things happened in Cleveland that when they ended up getting J.R. Smith at the deadline, it kind of closed the door on Ray for the rest of that season, or else I think he would have ended up playing with the Cavaliers. But yeah, I mean, as far as Dwyane goes, to me, the China one is compelling, and I think it's compelling for a lot of reasons. Like to Channing's argument, why I don't agree with it, is because Dwyane at this stage can still be a good NBA player. We saw that last year, and I think what you were talking about earlier with Nick Friedel, you're referring to his tenure with the Bulls, not with the Heat. Which again with the Bulls.
Did I say the Heat? My bad.
Yeah. I didn't want to correct your time, but yeah, but yeah, it didn't go great with the Bulls, and it didn't go great with the Cavaliers, and it might not go great with the Lakers. Although I do think that the one thing that team is missing more than anything else, if the guys will buy into it, is at least the professionalism example that Dwyane and Udonis will set. I think if they wanted to go out there together, I think that would be a message in the same way that bringing Mike Miller and James Jones to Cleveland was, which is what LeBron tried to do there. So I see some similarities. But to me, the China thing is the only one with real upside. Okay, like with the Lakers, like even if Dwyane and Udonis go out there, like with what Udonis has to offer left as a basketball player, best case scenario for the Lakers is maybe they get to the second round, and I think that's unlikely in the Western Conference. Staying in Miami, again, the roster is a mess, and we can talk about what they may be able to do by the trade deadline, and you can clear out Tyler potentially, you can clear out Dion potentially. But in the meantime, you can't build the value of either of those two guys if you're going to be playing Dwyane. So I just and again, you're stalling Josh Richardson, because what we talked about with Dwyane last year was Dwyane had this very positive effect on Justice Winslow, did not have a positive effect from a playing standpoint on Josh Richardson. That Josh basically went into an offensive shell after Dwyane came back. And to me, that's the last thing that you want to happen, because Josh is the one guy who you really want to see additional development from, in addition to Justice and Bam. So I think when you look at China, look, when Marbury went to China, he had a checkered past, okay? He was not in his prime either, maybe a little closer to it than Dwyane is. Was not as good a player as Dwyane, although pretty damn good when he was playing at a high level in Minnesota. And look at what Marbury's become in that country. Now, you said Dwyane goes over there, who already has a profile internationally, has a huge profile in China. I've told this story on the Patreon feed, but the first time he went there, they were on a plane, and Lisa Joseph, who works with him, sent out a tweet about how Dwyane would have a meetup once he landed in Beijing, and he thought nobody was going to show up. And the thing was like, it was like a long wait to see him. And now that he comes back again, if he's going to come back and embrace the country as a player for that country, I mean, you can make an argument that after Yao Ming, Dwyane Wade could be the second biggest figure in Chinese basketball history. And so I do think that is compelling. Now, the problem, as you mentioned, is the personal problem, which is that he has two sons, and one of those sons is rising up the ladder from a basketball perspective himself. And you're not going to move him to China, I wouldn't think. So you're going to miss all of that. I guess you could come back in March, because I think that's when contracts in China end, and you could see some of it, and maybe you can even join an NBA team, maybe even the Heat at that stage. But to me, that's, like you said, that's the only reason, in my opinion, not to do it. It's not so much for me about the money of the contract. It's the profile increase for him at a stage where there's really nothing he can do in the United States to increase his profile anymore. He's done all of it. And he had two moments with the Heat last year, one against the Sixers in the regular season and one in the postseason. I don't know what's left for him in the NBA, and I just don't think the Heat did a very good job. I'm not going to get into the contract issue. We can talk about what money he's worth. 5.3 seems somewhat appropriate. To me, it's the clearing out the roster that they didn't do. There's just no place for him on this team, and it's not his fault.
Yeah, it's not his fault, but also, if you're going to blame the Heat for this, you're blaming them a year ago, 2 years ago. Like, I'm not blaming them for not stapling an asset to whoever in order to get rid of them. Like, I don't think that's a prudent decision to build out a basketball team, is to staple Justice Winslow to someone or basically exchange problems, right? Like, and that wouldn't help the Heat either. If you're going to, hey, I'll give you James Johnson, but you take my bad contract. Like, I just don't know how that helps the situation. So I understand the Heat in this offseason basically doing nothing. They've done nothing in the offseason, and I totally get it. And I've been saying that I think they should just kind of ride out the wave. Maybe you take a chance on, Kawhi Leonard or if DeMar DeRozan was available, you sort of take, big swings and you sort of spend the next few years that way. But I don't know why the Heat would do anything other than what they've done so far in this offseason. If you go back in time and not give Deion Waiters or James Johnson or whomever those contracts, you would absolutely do that. But in this offseason, I totally understand what they've done. I just don't think that when you're sort of looking at it going forward, you can bring Dwyane Wade back and you can play some guys out of position. Like, I do think the NBA does allow you to play three small guards and not get totally destroyed on the defensive end. Like, I think that there is still some maneuverability. The one thing, though, in terms of the money, yes, $5 million for Dwyane Wade is fair now, but the one thing that is kind of the counter argument to that is that if, for example, Dwyane Wade came back on 1 year and said, this is my last year, the figure that's worth to the Heat in terms of business, in terms of all the stuff that's going to happen, is significantly more than that figure. And that, for me, was always the thing with Dwyane, was you have to sort of balance these two things, which is his business worth to you as a franchise and his basketball worth. And I think those are two very different figures, and particularly going forward now, as he gets closer towards retirement, that number actually only becomes higher, while his basketball worth only becomes lower. So figuring out his dollar amount is always going to be hard.
Yeah, it is, and you're right about that. And it was a huge boost for them last year, and it is going to be deflating to some Heat fans. I mean, I understand what you're saying about not doing anything this offseason. I mean, Andy Bailey on Twitter posted everybody's changes this offseason in terms of value over replacement player, and the only team in the league that was at 0 in terms of not better and not worse was the Heat. The only team that didn't do anything at all other than just re-sign Wayne Ellington. So I think it's a hard sell to Heat fans, to just bring everyone back. I understand why it's been done, but you're right. It's the mistakes. To me, it's the 4 contracts that were signed in 16 and 17 that are the problem. You cannot blame. You can't cite the tax to not bring Dwyane back, because I don't want to hear about the tax. I mean, the Heat put themselves in this position,
and they haven't paid it
their way out of it at some point. So I just don't have any sympathy for that particular argument. The not wanting to give up assets, that I get, okay, but the tax thing has never resonated with me. Obviously, Mickey is a very, very, very wealthy man. He's certainly in the top third in NBA owners in terms of wealth. And so that's the one thing that I've just never bought. Now, I understand not wanting to pay it for a team that's going to be 43 and 39. I get it. But again, you kind of put yourself in this position, which I want to transition to the next part here with the Heat before we move on to the Dolphins and the Marlins, which was Pat Riley's comments. And I don't know if these were exclusive to Barry Jackson, but it was a Barry Jackson article. So that's the one that I'm citing.
I think he had like some sort of conference call, because there were a few outlets that had them.
Okay, they might have been Barry's questions, and I think that's the way that he framed them. So we always like to give proper attribution here. But there were some comments in here from Pat that I addressed on the Patreon feed, but let's go through them again. He said, you don't ever want to make a trade for the sake of making a trade. You don't want to just do that and say, let's just do something because everybody is upset. Every now and then, people have to step back, even the organization, and take a deep breath and get ready for another season. That's what we're doing, and I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the continuity of our players. Our players don't like to be perceived how they're being perceived as a team, and maybe where they're going to finish. That always serves as motivation. He said, I don't feel that level of anger from Heat fans. There are fans that write in that say they want more. We try to address it, let them know if you have a little patience. You have to have a little patience at times. Right now, we're in that period of hoping our fans will just have a little patience and let this thing grow. And then he did later kind of make a distinction between, and this comes up on Twitter all the time, Chris, he made a distinction between sort of big 3 Heat fans and Heat fans. He didn't do it explicitly, but that's kind of how it got read by a lot of different people. I mean, this quote in particular, he said, if any fan out there is unhappy or angry we didn't go out and get LeBron James or Kevin Durant or Boogie Cousins or whatever else they felt they would want us to get, probably didn't realize we couldn't get them anyhow, that we couldn't trade for them. There are things I read where people are so uninformed about the rules and what we can and cannot do until one of you reporters, and most of the time you do that, say we couldn't make that move. And then he said free agency and room can be overstated. You can have room fatigue. Since 2010, we've been a team that has always been chasing somebody bigger and better. All right, I sort of unpack this on the Patreon feed, which, again, we recommend you subscribe to. I'm going to let you do it here.
Yeah, room fatigue, I didn't understand that one, which was basically we keep playing for salary cap flexibility and we keep striking out, so we'd rather give away that salary cap space so that we don't sort of constantly exhaust ourselves with the dream of getting something better. I don't necessarily understand that concept. I do understand where he's coming from in terms of the pipe dream trades where we do this and we do that and we don't take anyone else's problem back and people will value our stuff. I think the one thing that's sort of happened in this offseason is that, and I heard LeBatard say this on the radio this morning, and it sounded like it was sourced, that the Heat have basically, in their trade discussions, only been offered punishments in return. Like, we'll take your stuff, but you got to take our stuff. And the Heat don't want to do that, and I totally understand it, because that seems to be where a lot of the league is right now. And, well, you would hope that your organization would rise above it, and Pat Riley was a year away from rising above it, right? Like, he was a year away, but then the 2017 offseason happened, and he didn't rise above it. But a lot of teams right now are in cap hell. A lot of teams right now are looking to offload stuff that they regret signing, and I think that it's totally understandable that they approach the offseason this way. But I don't get trying to justify further that 2017 offseason. Like, he is someone who has always talked about wanting to win championships and being a championship organization and competing at the highest level. And when he says that, I don't know, to be honest with you, I've not read the quotes yet, but the degree to which he is separating Big Three Heat fans from the rest of the fan base, like, I don't think it's just Big Three Heat fans that are the people that started following the team in 2010 that want them constantly competing. He's someone who set that standard for the organization, and he's someone who sets that standard for himself. So as much as people want to say, well, you can be fine with getting the 6th seed and competing in the playoffs and then eventually going out, like, he's someone who himself has always wanted more. And so I don't know why he would set that he would want that standard changed for anybody. Like, this is how the Heat define themselves. Now, are there going to be times in which they're not going to be good? Of course. Only the Spurs get to win 50 games every year, and even the year in which they don't win 50, they make the playoffs anyway. But I don't know why he would want anything about the way that he is viewed or the organization is viewed to be changed just based off the fact of their current predicament. So I don't understand, having a go at people for wanting them to compete more and do more, because I don't think right now, I think the conversation around the league has changed so much from, making the playoffs and doing well is okay. Well, now it's referred to as the treadmill of mediocrity, right? Like, when you're sick, you're the 13th best team in the league, and you're drafting in the mid-teens, and you don't have any maneuverability out of it or any young players that look like superstars. Like, that is the worst thing you can be in the league. So I think, or at least in the eyes of some. Now, I've certainly been yelled at plenty that people enjoy it, and people enjoy watching the games, and they're fun games, and they like winning a little bit, if not winning the championship. Like, okay, but I think a lot of people aren't accepting of that, and I don't think Pat Riley's accepting of that. So I don't know why he would have a pop at anyone for expecting otherwise.
Isn't this the winning or misery guy? And was winning 43 games, does that qualify as the winning? I mean, I had to read Winner Within about 6 times to memorize it. So that when I was covering him, I just don't get this at all. And let me read you the rest of the quote, because I do think the Big Three thing is legitimate in terms of social media. So here was his quote on this. I talk to a lot of fans. I've given speeches to our season ticket holders and our sponsors and talked to people. And what comes across social media, or what some fan who might be a real diehard fan might show in frustration, is because we are not where we were when we had the Big Three. We don't have that kind of team right now. Somewhere along the line, people have to realize you are a basketball fan and you love the game. I mean, if I would have put a quote up from any executive in all of professional sports, Pat Riley is the last person you would have put next to that quote. Just the absolute last person. It's totally out of character, in the same way that 2017 was out of character. And look, I remember his press conference after the 2016 summer, where he talked about how there were a lot of teams that signed bad contracts that were going to regret them, and those players would be moved in the next couple of years. That was the organizational belief. It wasn't just him. It was others in the organization. And so, again, 2016, look, the Tyler thing, again, I think that came from above him. The Whiteside thing, you and I have talked about ad nauseum. There are justifications for it. There just was no justification for what happened last summer. Just none. I mean, to compound it. And, I mean, now we're at a situation where, can you move either of those guys? We talk a lot about Tyler and we talk a lot about Hassan, but we don't talk as much about Dion or James Johnson. And maybe both will have bounce back seasons. I mean, James Johnson clearly was playing hurt last year. And so there were a lot of good things he did the previous season. I still think he's a progress stopper for Justice, which to me is not ideal. But, as far as Dion goes, I mean, Dion plays into a lot of this. Like, if you're getting the Dion you got for 2 months at the end of that season, okay, you can justify that number. I just don't know if we believe we're going to get that. And so I look at this quote, and again, I understand the separation between Big Three Twitter and prior Twitter, and Pat does look on Twitter. Okay, so that's where a lot of this is coming from, and so I understand his frustration with people wanting them to be champions all the time. I get that. And look, there are a lot of fans who came in 2004, 2005, also. Okay, with Shaq. I mean, and we're getting to the stage where they're core fans who are in their 20s and 30s, right? Like that's their first era, right? Like that's your first era, pretty much. I mean, we've had people on the show talking about the Zoe Hardaway years. And again, that's educational for you in a lot of ways because you were young. I mean, I was covering it.
My first era was really like kind of the pre-Dwyane Wade drafting team. So when we talked to Brian Grant, like those were some of the like the Eddie Jones, Brian Grant, and those teams that at times struggled, and then it kind of all fell apart there. And yeah, like that's what I remember. Like I'm not totally spoiled by the Heat, but I am, I think, spoiled by the league, which is, I think it's a tanking or contending league right now. I think those teams in the middle are kind of in an undesirable location. I think the Heat are kind of the least desirable of those undesirable teams because at least, like, okay, Portland is not going to compete for a championship, but they have Damian Lillard. Like, where's the Heat's Damian Lillard? Like, not just a player who, by himself is not good enough to win you a championship, but is a building block. Like, that for me is the thing that I always sort of grapple with when I talk about how dire the state of the team is. I don't think I'm being spoiled. I just think that there's nothing that gives you any sense of hope for the future, or a player, a draft pick, an asset, and like I just don't think that there's anything that gives you that sense of hope going forward.
Because if you look at other teams that are sort of in the slight upper middle class of the NBA right now, which is where I think the Heat are. And I think honestly, Chris, I think the only reason they're there instead of middle to slightly lower middle is because of their coach, honestly.
Sure.
I don't think that the roster is necessarily upper middle class, but I think their coach makes it upper middle class.
But look, just if you look at the Eastern Conference that surrounds them right now, among the teams that were in kind of the bottom half of the playoffs, right? So if you're Indiana, you look at the season that Victor Oladipo just had, and you go, okay, Victor Oladipo, that's a dude that we can build around. Milwaukee has Giannis. Washington have Wall and Beal. In the West, again, bottom half of the conference.
New Orleans has Davis.
New Orleans has Davis. Utah has Donovan Mitchell. OKC has Paul George and Westbrook. San Antonio just traded for DeMar DeRozan. They have Aldridge. Minnesota, it hasn't worked, but Wiggins, Towns, and Jimmy Butler. At least you can talk yourself into, well, if we trade them or if we get this back in return or we make the right changes. Denver with Jokic, like the Heat don't even have Jokic, and Alf made fun. Alf of Heat being made fun of me for Jokic, but like Jokic's a damn good player, and like
who's 24, Chris?
Right, who's 24?
Goran is what, 31, right?
Yeah.
So I mean that's the problem. We're not saying that Goran's not a good player. He's a very good player, but I mean he's not a build-around player at this stage of his career.
So unless you're, and then obviously the Lakers with LeBron and even Dallas now with Doncic, like you can start to get excited about that. Like unless you're projecting massive growth from either Bam, Justice, or Josh, which I am not. Maybe the optimist Heat fans are. Like again, there just isn't anything right now in the team that gives you that sense of hope going forward. So maybe Pat Riley is right in some respects that you can just enjoy the basketball, and certainly I would be sort of down for an argument like that, which is just, hey, enjoy the games. Go to the games. They'll be fun. They'll make the playoffs. They'll be entertaining. It's not like we play a dreary style of basketball, but I just don't know that there's really anything there that going forward that in 3 years' time, okay, here's our path back to contending for championships. And that's how Pat Riley's always measured himself. So I feel comfortable, even if it makes me sound like demanding and entitled, that I feel comfortable saying, well, I want the path to the next one. I want some kind of layout or plan that you can see that's obvious. That's not, well, in 2 years we'll have cap space, like something more than that. That would lead me to believe that that's down the road for the Heat.
This is the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Sports by Miami for Miami on demand. We now have 10 podcasts in the network posting roughly 15 times per week. All can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and several cross-platform apps. We are on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Here's some of what you missed last week on the Fish Tank when they interviewed Mike Pouncey.
You know, every single day when I came to work, I was the best football player I could be. And I felt like I made guys better around me. And I love the organization. I mean, we didn't win as much as we should have, but I love being a Miami Dolphin. I love the fact of saying, hey, listen, I'm a Dolphin.
If you want to get involved as a sponsor or a contributor, reach out to us at number 5 Reason Sports on Twitter. And don't forget to punch 5 Reasons in your search bar and then hit subscribe.
All right, let's move part 2 here to the Dolphins. And in particular, I want to focus, Chris, on the wide receivers. A guy who's gone and some of the guys who are here. Jarvis Landry cannot stop talking about the Dolphins, Chris.
It just doesn't stop.
I don't, and this is how bad it is, okay? Britt McHenry, who you know I'm not a fan of, tweeted some ridiculous stuff. I mean, her sports opinions somewhere beneath her political opinions. She tweeted some ridiculous stuff about Ryan Tannehill, about how Serena Williams would make a better quarterback, okay, and other stuff to that effect. And so after she made these ridiculous comments about Ryan Tannehill, Josh Houts, who's kind of a friend of the network, posted, or maybe it was him or maybe it was someone else, posted a poll about who you despised more, Britt McHenry, as a Dolphin fan, Britt McHenry or Jarvis Landry, and Jarvis was winning that poll the last that I checked. This was a guy who was one of the most popular, if not the most popular Dolphin over the past 2 to 3 years.
He was actually right in saying he was the face of the team, but I don't know if he's right about the fact that the team didn't want him to be the face of the team, but he was definitely the face of the team the last 2 years.
Yes, I mean he was the try-hard face of the Dolphins, right? Like this was the guy who you knew was giving you max effort. Now sometimes it went over the line, but he gave you max effort all the time. And and this is really the issue here, Chris. He was featured more than any other player in Dolphin history. Okay, I mean like featured to the extent that Ricky Williams was in 2002 and 2003. I mean if you just look at plays that he used, if you did usage rate in the NFL like you do in basketball, he had a Westbrook-like usage rate over the past couple of seasons, just like Ricky did in 2002, 2003. But since he's left, he's basically compared the Cleveland quarterback situation favorably compared to Tannehill and the Dolphins, which, again, we can make an argument about it, but I don't know why it was necessary to do. And then he's also come out and complained about his usage or the way he was used with the Dolphins and kind of called out Adam Gase pretty specifically on that. Does he have a point about any of this?
I see. For me, the thing, and we were arguing about this, is that I do think that there is a semantical argument that's, I think, at the heart of this. So he used the word underutilized, right? And I don't think there's a universe in which Jarvis Landry can argue he was underutilized with 160 targets. He averaged 10 targets a game. It was in the top 5 of the league, and it's an astronomical figure, right? He was the center point of the offense. But I do think he can say he was improperly utilized in that he feels like he can do more as a receiver. And I mean, we can check his average depth of target or go back and look at the film on all 160 of those targets and check and see where in the field they were thrown. I can pretty well assure that a lot of them are within 6 yards of the line of scrimmage. And maybe that's where he feels like, okay, you're going to criticize me for averaging 8.8 yards per catch. Well, if you had given me more opportunities to run down the field and maybe catch 15-yard passes, like that number wouldn't look so bad. I was cast in this role in this offense that's not my only skill set, right? Like I wanted to do more. I wanted to do more like different stuff, but because he's come out and criticized Tannehill for not organizing team activities when a lot of people have said that Tannehill did do that. When he's criticized, like he's done a lot of criticizing in the aftermath of leaving the Dolphins, and it hasn't always come off as true, frankly. Like it hasn't come off as valid criticisms, and the Dolphins have or at least Adam Gase. I don't know the extent to which this has been denied, but a lot of it has been denied. I do think that Jarvis Landry is clearly bitter about something that happened during his time in Miami. I think he wanted to be valued as a franchise player, and he wasn't, right? Just strictly based off the contract. Landry told SI, I believe, that he was offered 5 years, 55, with about half of it guaranteed. He ended up getting 5 years, 80, with about half of it guaranteed. So he was given a much bigger contract from Cleveland. I think he wanted that contract from Miami in a different role as well. It was just never going to happen. So I understand that there is some bitterness. I understand in sort of a world in which he could have said it differently that he would have been right, but the way in which it came out just sounds like a bitter, ex-player who, is angry about the way that the situation played out, and maybe doesn't want to be in Cleveland, and maybe looks around and goes, well, how the hell am I here? And maybe I'm sort of projecting things onto him that aren't true, but I don't understand why he continues to have a go at the Dolphins and Adam Gase when I think it all kind of played out as it should have.
What's funny about the Cleveland thing is if they had Des Bryant, and that's something as we're taping this podcast today that still may happen, they have more big names on that offense than the Dolphins have on theirs.
Yeah.
I mean, Landry, Gordon, and Bryant. Now, I don't know what Des has left. He's had his own.
I don't think it's very much. I think the injuries have totally wrecked his career.
Yeah, I think so too. And I also think, by the way, he's been treated totally unfairly. I think by the media and the Cowboys. One of the reports that came out, from Matt Miller at Bleacher Report, which cited unnamed Cowboys players, sort of killing him. I hate those reports. I mean, it's fine to educate your opinion on something, but to go out with a report like that really, really bugged me. Who are those players? I mean, those players could be backup special teamers. Like, I don't know who those players are. And I think to sort of put Des on blast about that, I think is totally unfair. But getting back to Cleveland here, again, they've got Carlos Hyde, they've got Duke Johnson, they brought in Baker Mayfield, they've got Tyrod Taylor. Like, on paper, and I know you can't do that in the NFL because a lot of times you put those pieces together and they don't work, but on paper they have a lot bigger names than the Dolphins do. But I guess my thing with Jarvis is this: I just don't know what purpose it serves at this point. I don't understand it. Like, he still had a lot of supporters here in South Florida, a lot, who felt, as you're talking about, that he could have been valued more, that there shouldn't have been such a focus on kind of the blow-ups on the field because the other things that he did made it worth it. And so I think part of what's happened here is that the Ajayi thing, which, there was some criticism of Gase after that, has kind of allowed voice to be given to some of these criticisms of Gase. And so, and look, players can criticize whoever they want, and there are probably players, I'm sure there are players who are still with the Dolphins who feel that way about Adam Gase. I mean, I can tell you from covering the Dolphins for years, there's 53 guys plus practice squad guys plus other guys coming in and out. There are always guys who are pissed at the coach, always, okay? And they're always sidling up to reporters to tell them that they should be utilized a different way. I mean, it used to happen with me all the time, okay? And certain guys constantly, and then they'd get their opportunity, they wouldn't do anything with it. But I do think that there's this sort of empowerment now about criticizing the Dolphins and criticizing Adam Gase. And I think, in part, the Dolphins have brought some of that on themselves because, as we've talked about on previous podcasts, they have a habit of kind of using the media to criticize guys on the way.
Right. It's actually
and they did it with Landry, actually.
Right. And that kind of smear campaign. I don't want to call it a smear campaign, but like a.
Well, it is, Chris.
I agree. But to me, it's one of the things that I don't like about the Dolphins. I don't like when things start getting leaked and, these are the problems that we've been dealing with this player, to kind of hasten the departure. But I do think with Landry, like, I think some of that stuff has been justified. Like, I understand now why the Dolphins would. Now, I think a lot of it's to try and get the fan base on side with their decisions. And I think if you sort of polled people, how do you feel about Jarvis Landry being traded to the Cleveland Browns when it happened, I think there would have been a lot of Dolphins negativity. Whereas if you pulled that now, I think a lot of the Dolphins fan base that's seen what's happened with Landry since he's left, I think that move would probably now overwhelmingly be positively received. So I do think that shift has happened without question on Jarvis, and part of it is his own responsibility, and part of it is, I think, the Dolphins, having information out there that I think has sort of swayed public opinion. But I no doubt think that he is no longer as popular here, and it's not just the way. Like, I actually think that there have been times where, because of the way that people feel about the Dolphins, after people have left, you almost kind of end up rooting for them a little bit, because it's you finally got away from the Dolphins, and the Dolphins have been this terrible organization and have kind of ruined your career. But I definitely don't think that's the case here with Jarvis Landry.
No, but they did it with Ajayi, and they did it with Sue to a certain degree, and they did it with Landry, and they again, they use certain reporters to do it, and it's obvious. And look, the Heat, the Heat have refrained from doing it in a lot of situations. Now, when certain guys, we've talked about this too, when certain guys in the media are criticizing, say, Hassan, we kind of know where that's coming from.
Sure.
Okay. I mean, it's from inside the house. Okay. Because there are certain reporters who are not going to criticize the Heat unless it's coming from the Heat. And so it's just something.
But
if you're in this business,
But think about how much they wanted to have a pop at LeBron. I mean, they would have loved to have
and
all kinds of stuff.
And look, some of them did quietly. Some of them did, to me, some of them did to others in the media. I mean, there are stories that still haven't gotten out that just basically a lot of us just decided were not worth telling. But they did, but they were mostly restrained. And I think, again, when I did a long sit down with Pat, I guess it was a year after it happened, and Pat on the record was very sort of critical of LeBron and breaking up the generational team and all of that. It did strike me as a departure because they had avoided doing that publicly in any way, and Spoelstra in particular bent over backwards not to do that. So it is a different approach, and I do think some of that has boomeranged on the Dolphins a little bit, and where Landry has wanted to sort of say his piece because he felt that media members were being used against him. But again, I don't think that there's really any point for him to continue to do it. Now, look, one other thing before we get to the Marlins, is one of the other reasons I think that people are sort of getting over the Landry thing here is because this happens in every training camp where everybody gets excited about the current receivers. Like this is a rite of summer. I go back to the days of Brian Manning, who was, I believe, a sixth round pick, maybe in the mid to late 90s. And I remember going to Mexico City during, I think it was Zach's either rookie year or second year, and people were more excited about Brian Manning than about Zach Thomas because he was the receiver who was tearing up. And Zach Thomas, who, by the way, is going to be on our network this week on Fish Tank. He did an hour sit down with OJ and Seth. But we're not doing one with Brian Manning. Nice guy, but didn't. And very smart. Went to Stanford, but didn't pan out into anything. And I feel like we did this all the time. We did it with Robert Baker. We did it with James Pruitt. One reporter in particular who we just recently had on our podcast, did an excellent job for us. Did it with Legadou Nane. We do this with these receivers every year. There was a Chris Williams, I believe, a few years ago. Every year there's this fifth or sixth receiver, and I feel like there are two guys this year. There's Jakeem Grant, okay, who I understand some of the hype there because we saw a little bit of it.
Right, he actually did it in regular season games.
He did it in a regular season game, and I felt he should have been more utilized earlier. And the other was Isaiah Ford, who was drafted last year in the 7th round, and now he is the hot thing in training camp. And the only thing I'll say here before we move to the Marlins is just be careful here, okay? just be careful because we do. Roberto Wallace is another name. There was a guy named London. I can't remember his first name. He was also a model.
That sounds familiar, yeah.
Yeah, there is always one that we get excited about, and then they're either cut on the last day of camp and everybody makes a big deal, they don't get picked up anywhere else, or they end up on the practice squad and maybe they get into a game. One story before we move to the Marlins, Robert Baker, who actually became a rapper ultimately. I think his name became Shiv Shivers. I ran into him at Heat. He became a rapper. Look at
the amount of detail to which you remember on these stories is insane to me.
I can't remember what I did last week, but I spent a lot of money at Disney. But so Robert Baker finally got in a game, and he caught a pass. And I remember I was standing with him and Aronde Gadsden at their lockers, and Robert looked at Aronde and said, Aronde had something like 300 catches in the NFL at that point. He was a starting receiver. who had made it from nothing, right? He was an Arena League guy. And Robert Baker looked at him and said, "I'm coming for you." And that was his last catch. He never had another one. So I'm just saying, just be cautious on Isaiah Ford. He may end up being really good. I don't know, but he may be Sam Simmons. I mean, I've been through this too many times. All right, let's move here.
I just want to know. I just want to know very quickly that Danny Amendola's relationship is far more significant to me. It seems like he and Tannehill are getting into a good relationship, and people are impressed with the amount of things that he can do. I think people sort of view him as a Patriot slot guy. And I think he appears to have done more than that. And also, I think I might have done a little bit of what you were doing because as you were talking, I flipped through my Instagram feed, and the first thing at the top of it was Mike Gesicki catching a fade route on the Dolphins, and he looks so impressive, man. That dude's huge. That dude's huge.
But that one I understand. Like that one I get. Like that's a second round pick who did ungodly things in college. Like and we know what his strength is. Okay. Like we know what his weakness is, and that's, being addressed in camp too. And that won't really come into play until we get into the games, but we know what his strength is. And like, I think he's a Rookie of the Year candidate, honestly. So that one's legit, and maybe Isaiah Ford is legit, and maybe Jakeem Grant takes the next step, but they could also be Julius Pruitt. Okay. Right. I've been through this.
And I mean, if we're talking about all these different names, like we don't know how many of them are going to make the team, and we don't know how many of them are going to get a reasonable amount of reps that they could impress. Like Jakeem Grant's issue for 2 years has been that he can't get on the field. Like there's too much of a logjam at receiver. Now maybe some of that gets solved with Landry leaving, but I mean, if you still have Devontae Parker, Kenny Stills, and Amendola, and Albert Wilson, like that's a lot. Like unless you're playing regular 4 receiver sets, which doesn't really happen very often in the NFL, like it's going to be hard for all these guys to get reps.
All right, let's go to the Marlins here real quick because there is some potential news with them. The trade deadline is coming up here in the next 24 hours. And look, the one guy on the Marlins, and we can talk about some of the relievers that are out there that the Marlins may continue to move, just to sort of add pieces because, the one thing you don't really need when you're not a contending team at this stage are sort of, high-end seventh inning relievers. Like that's something that you can find down the road. But the one piece that they have that other teams want is JT Realmuto, and he's having a good year. He was an all-star. He plays a premium position where it's difficult to find kind of a cornerstone piece. He's sort of the one guy left from that core group that they had. And there are teams that are interested. And the team that's been talked, it was the Astros at one point. The team that's been talked about the most recently is the Nationals. There was an offer reportedly with a top prospect, an outfield prospect, Victor Robles. There also part of that offer was a catcher who's kind of considered more of a placeholder, Spencer Kieboom, who I guess Eric Reed would like, but I don't know a whole lot about him. And I guess
it took me a second. That joke was great.
Sorry. And so I just don't. So I'm looking at this now, and I guess the question is really this. Can you get more potentially by tomorrow? I guess it's possible. Robles, I guess I was looking up some stuff on Baseball America. He's considered at least as good a prospect as anybody that the Marlins acquired last offseason, potentially better than anybody they acquired last offseason. He'd be under team control, which is obviously for the Marlins is a big deal. Would you move, again, a premium catcher who has not yet entered his prime, who seems to have some leadership ability potentially also, who has learned how to handle a pitching staff? Would you move that guy for one premium prospect, or would you hold him, try to move him either this offseason or maybe even get a long-term deal done?
Yeah, I'm surprised that the Marlins can't hold an auction for this player. I mean, you look at, there aren't that many Major League catchers, and Realmuto missed a stretch of the season, but there are many Major League catchers that have the requisite number of at-bats to be listed as qualified hitters. There's actually on ESPN only 7, and on Fangraphs there's only 6. So I think it's a minimum number of 300 at-bats in order to qualify. And Realmuto's got by far the highest OPS and by far the highest WAR. Like this, you can make the argument, is the best offensive catcher in baseball. And you're right. I think he is really the Marlins' last remaining asset. Now, you can certainly hold on to him with the thinking that at some point we're going to want to be good and he can be a building block. But I feel like that's far enough down the road that you can make a decision to hold an auction for him now. He's 27 years of age. If, let's say, your timeline is to be good in 2021, right? Let's say it's 3 years from now, and he'll be in his 30s. Like, this is, I think, represents the peak of his value. And I do think that the Marlins should seriously think about trading him and hold an auction. I saw yesterday there were some quotes from Bryce Harper, or it was over the weekend. So the Marlins beat the Nationals in walk-off fashion on Saturday night. And I think after the game, Bryce Harper said, well, that wouldn't have happened if he was on our team. And so Bryce Harper is packing on the pressure. Now, Bryce Harper might leave, so I don't know if the Nationals want to be taking their personnel decision advice from a player who might not be there, but the Nationals are 6 off the wild card right now. They have a long way to catch Arizona.
That's what the Heat did.
Right, exactly, right.
That's Napier over Capella, right?
Right, yeah, he might be the Shabazz Napier of the Nationals. Realmuto, he's a lot better. But I think that for teams that want to compete, that want to contend, Realmuto would be an incredible addition. Like, you don't have very many catchers that are near 900 in OPS and have a batting average over 300. Like, this is a really good player at his position, and I think could be a premium addition for, might be one of the best players available at the deadline. So I think the Marlins should be able to get a lot, whether it's one elite prospect or 3 really good ones. Like, I think the Marlins should be able to make a killing here on this trade, and I think if we're talking about a really, long timeline for the Marlins to really get good, I don't know if JT Realmuto, age 30, is going to be at this offensive level in 3 years' time, is going to be able to catch, 110, 120 games at that age. Sell high. That's the whole point of all this, is sell high. And I thought they've really only done so far on Yelich, and I think they can make a killing here, and I think they should.
Yelich is leading the National League in hitting right now, right? That's
he's up there.
Yeah.
Anyway, 320 started with Nick Markakis of the Braves.
Yeah.
This is, by the way, the first time I've been on the National League player batting stats page all year long.
I just noticed that the other day. I mean, I know. Obviously, look, Stanton's hasn't had that hot streak that he had last year, so a little different story. But I guess a couple questions on this. I guess, would JT's market be greater now? Or, as you said, the Nationals are 6 games out. I think it might be a little bit different, and I know they have to sort of prove it to Harper, and that's playing into this, that if they want him to stay, although I don't think he's staying, but if they want him to stay, that they have to try to make a run. But I wonder if the Nationals were 2 games out, if this would look a little bit different. They might be a little bit more willing to part with a second big-time prospect. And I also wonder if you just hold JT until the offseason, what the market would be for him. The other thing about it too is, we talk about him being 27 years old, and you don't think of catchers as aging gracefully at times, but a lot of them have, and sometimes they don't catch as many games. But he's a good enough athlete that he could move to another position. Like, he doesn't have to be a catcher full time when he's 31, and that's the only other thing to consider here. I mean, you look at his workload over the past 4 years. I mean, he really didn't break in till he was 24, right? I mean, if you look at how many games he's actually caught over the past few years, he caught 9 in 2014. He caught 118 in 2015, 129 in 2016, 126 last season, and then 71 this season. So, I mean, he's caught 453 games. I mean, that's not – I mean, if I was to look at Yadier Molina right now, it's quite a bit higher. So I don't think that he's going to age so poorly that you couldn't make an argument to keep him around and sort of make him your build-around piece. I mean, he has all the other attributes. And so I don't know if you have to sort of – I agree with you. If you can get an auction situation here where you had 2 or 3 teams bidding, then it makes sense. But I think if you don't have something you really like, I wouldn't be averse to the Marlins holding him into the offseason and looking at 2 other options, which is trading him then or signing him to a long-term deal. I mean, just for perspective here, Molina has caught 1,788 games, including 73 this season at age 35. So, if JT took that kind of career path, and I think it's certainly possible, because if you look at Molina at 27 years old, he probably wasn't as good as JT is now. So I think you can make an absolute argument looking at keeping him long term. So we'll see what happens on that. Obviously, check us out, on iTunes, on Google Play, on anywhere that you get your podcasts, but also check out the other podcasts in our network and check out the Patreon feed. We will be running more contests on there this week. We're also going to run another contest for a Texas Roadhouse certificate here on our pod that we are doing with Dave Hyde. Join us for that one and for the others this week. Have a good day.